Hello, friends. I'm David Paulides, and this is Mystery Rift. We usually walk a different path here, one that cuts deep into the heart of the wildlands, the national forests, and the isolated places where people simply vanish. But tonight, we are going to look at the same perplexing phenomenon through a vastly different lens. What happens when the truly inexplicable occurs, not in a remote canyon, but in a place of supposed sanctuary, a sterile environment meant for healing, a location watched over by dozens of staff, and constantly lit by artificial light. Tonight, we examine 4 bizarre disappearances that share a terrifying, unified signature, the hospital vanishing, and I believe these cases fit the established, documented patterns we've worked tirelessly to map out in Missing 411. The similarities are too consistent to ignore. Our first case takes us back to April 1947 and the unimaginable chaos following the deadliest tornado in Oklahoma history, the monstrous F5 that ripped through Woodward. This disaster created a perfect storm of confusion. In the middle of this devastation, in the overcrowded Woodward Hospital, was 4-year-old Joan Gay Croft. Her mother had been tragically killed, her stepfather critically injured, and Joan herself had a minor injury to her leg. Joan and her sister were relegated to the hospital basement, which had been quickly converted into a chaotic makeshift refugee shelter. Then, the next day, the true mystery began. 2 men entered the chaos. They were described as wearing khaki army uniforms, and they made a deliberate, immediate beeline for Joan. This is where the Missing 411 pattern starts to resonate. The utter lack of logic and the sheer audacity of the extraction. They publicly singled her out of hundreds, and despite her loud protests and the attempts of overworked staff to intervene, the men were allowed to leave with the little girl. The explanation was flimsy, even bizarre. They claimed they were merely taking her to another hospital where her relatives were waiting. Think about that. In a hospital overflowing with trauma and grief, this poor excuse was accepted. Joan was never seen again. The men who knew her name and were specifically looking for her were never identified and vanished as completely as she did. Why her? Out of dozens of orphaned or injured children, why was Joan specifically targeted? How did they know her name? This wasn't a random snatch. It suggests a deep level of intelligence and prior knowledge that defies conventional criminal profiling. It suggests the abductors had access to data they shouldn't have had. Or perhaps they were directed by a source outside our immediate human understanding. The composed, professional manner of the abductors suggests they were prepared to easily bypass human intervention, almost as if they were expecting the hospital staff to simply comply with their demands. Next, we jump forward to 1959. This case has all the classic hallmarks of a phenomenon that touches the absolute edge of human memory and perception. The unbelievable story of Private First Class Gerry Irwin. He woke up in a hospital in Cedar City, Utah, with a devastating 23-hour gap in his memory. He'd been found after leaving a chilling note on his car, gone to investigate a possible plane crash. But the real reason he stopped was, he claimed, seeing a strange, pulsating object in the sky. When he woke up, he repeatedly asked, are there any survivors? Survivors of what? Even the highly disoriented Irwin didn't know. Irwin was medically cleared, but his mind clearly was not. He began suffering random, crippling, fainting spells. During a second evaluation, he woke up believing no time had passed at all, thinking he was still leaving the note on his car. He had completely lost weeks of his life. A traumatic memory gap we often see in these unexplained cases. Then came the absent without leave. He left the base without permission, traveled straight back to the original investigation spot, found his jacket, and inside, a pencil with a mysterious piece of paper twisted around it. He immediately burned the paper. then snapped out of his trance-like state. When he was picked up by the sheriff, he had no memory of leaving the base, traveling back, or burning the critical piece of evidence. After another extensive evaluation, he was released from the hospital, only to go AWOL again the very next day. Permanently. This wasn't a human kidnapping. This was a chilling, targeted manipulation. The profound loss of time, the focused return to a specific site, the burning of the unknown message, it all suggests that whatever he encountered on Route 14 had an ongoing, almost programmed effect on his behavior. He was released from the hospital not because he was healthy, but perhaps because his programming was finally complete. And the hospital became a temporary, unknowing holding facility before the final, inexplicable extraction. In 1978, we moved to the case of Benita Chamberlain in Eugene, Oregon. This incident is tragically simple, which makes it absolutely terrifying in the context of missing 411. Benita had just given birth prematurely, and her newborn daughter had fought for life for a week. When Benita returned to the hospital for a visit, she received the best news imaginable. Her daughter was strong, healthy, and she could take her home that very afternoon. Benita was ecstatic, relieved, and overwhelmed by joy. She called a friend with the fantastic news. She was last seen driving out of the hospital parking lot, and then gone. Her car was found abandoned at a nearby factory, her purse later discarded in a university parking lot. I have documented hundreds of cases where the victim is often in a specific, vulnerable emotional state or a major life transition point when they disappear. Benita was at a peak of happiness and relief, a massive emotional shift that could have served as a beacon. Was she targeted because of her highly intense state of mind? Or, if we consider the possibility of a non-human agency, was she deliberately taken at the climax of her protective maternal emotions? A perfect, powerful moment for extraction. An entity capable of traversing the human sphere might choose a moment of such intense psychological focus, a sort of emotional singularity, to facilitate an extraction that leaves behind no physical clue. It's a dark and disturbing theory, but one we must consider. Our final case is the one that most defies conventional explanation because the victim was the most vulnerable of all, 1-month-old Tavish Sutton. This occurred in March 1993 at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. Tavish was recovering from minor surgery. He was in the custody of child services, alone in a semi-private room. The nurse checked on him at 6:45 a.m. and he was fine. 15 minutes later, at 7:00 a.m., the 1-month-old baby was gone. Let's apply the missing 411 criteria to this impossible scenario. First, speed, 15 minutes. This is an impossible, almost cinematic window for a non-professional human abduction, given the locked nature and constant monitoring of a pediatric unit. Second, lack of evidence, no forced entry, no struggle. And according to some sources, the nurse was the only adult who entered or left the unit during that critical window of time. The physical logistics do not add up to a standard crime. This suggests an extraction by something that doesn't obey our three-dimensional rules, something that can bypass locks, pass through a barrier, or use a method of transportation that is instantaneous and undetectable by human staff. This is the perfect vanishing point. The hospital was too public, too staffed, so the mechanism, whatever it was, had to be lightning fast and leave behind a completely clean scene. The utter silence of the disappearance suggests a power that is operating far beyond our understanding of physics. Joan, Gerry, Benita, Tavish. Each case is a terrifying story of a person going to a supposed place of sanctuary, only to pass through a hidden door into a vast and terrifying unknown. When you look at these patterns, Whether the victims are disappearing from a remote national park or a busy city hospital, the signatures are too consistent to be random crime. The knowledge, the speed, the lack of evidence, the uncanny memory gaps. It speaks to a level of operational sophistication far above documented human capabilities. If we allow ourselves to hypothesize, let's consider a common thread that explains the impossible nature of these cases. Interdimensional predation. They may be exploiting the momentary chaos or intense emotions that a hospital generates. Perhaps there are powerful entities that exist alongside our own reality, accessing our world through specific points. Vortexes, if you will, that open and close rapidly. In the hospital, these points could be triggered by high emotional energy like Benita's joy, high chaos like Joan's tornado disaster, or even a direct encounter with an element of their own reality like Gerry's pulsating object. Tavish's disappearance suggests the entities simply exploited a fleeting, unguarded moment when the dimensional veil was critically thin. The hospitals, intended to heal and save, became the final confusing staging ground before an exit we can't comprehend. They were taken, not by random human criminals, but by something that perceives our reality as a temporary, easily accessible hunting ground. The terrifying truth is that we may be dealing with a powerful intelligence that views our physical locations, whether they be mountains or emergency rooms, as nothing more than transit hubs. The questions remain, but the patterns, friends, speak for themselves, and they are repeating themselves across decades and continents. Be careful, pay attention, and always look closely at the details that the police, by definition, have to throw away. I'm David Paulides. Until we meet again, stay safe out there. And please tell your animals I said hi.